Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenmara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight, now that my computer has decided to work with me, we'll be talking about basically Turkey. I mean Harpy. But we're getting back into the ancient myths of Greek and Rome. So the Harpy, which has been kind of demonized in modern society, but why? Well, the Harpy doesn't exactly have a great reputation. The Harpy is seen as a half human, half bird, usually a raptor style bird, eagle, hawk, etc. This is kind of a general depiction. I will say, and I purposely didn't pick any of their pictures, if you go to like DeviantArt and you punch in Harpy, there are some amazing artists out there who have some absolutely fantastic work, but like I said, I'm not going to poke or pick someone's work like that. They put a lot of effort into most of those pictures that I saw, but they are, like I said, usually half human, half bird. Generally, they are female, and I, to my knowledge, have never seen a male version. Some said that they have the heads of the fairest maidens, really beautiful women looks, the wings of the bird and the feet of the bird, like talons. But the body was either bird or human female. And it depended on the author. The amount of differing stories and descriptions that I found, because we're not dealing with just the Greeks at this point, we also have the Romans who are involved, so we have a lot more information. A lot more information, but not, because the descriptions are all kind of the same as to where they go and what they do, but as far as extras, short of breaking down each and every author and story, which would take forever, we're going over the generals tonight. But some believe that the Harpies were beautiful young women with the wings of a bird. It was said they had long, beautiful hair. Sounds almost like a flying angel, right? Well, not quite. Not every myth painted them as beautiful. Some of the older Greek myths were very focused on their beauty. But as time went on, as it does, they were now starting to be seen as disgusting, monstrous beings, leading people to just straight up call the Harpies monsters altogether and not being able to see a redeemable action here. Most of the later descriptions describe them as ugly with an unstoppable hunger for flesh or food in general. So much for that angel part. There was one description that I just thought was entertaining, and it was by a person named Hyginus, and it was stated by this person that the Harpies had, quote, they were feathered and had the head of a cock or rooster. They had wings, human arms, so we're not just talking about arms that were wings, they actually had a set of wings on their back. Claws, breasts, bellies, and other female parts. They went into some other descriptions, so we left out the rest of the female parts. Overall, though, having talons for feet and claws for fingers doesn't sound like a pleasant being to want to go up against. The Harpies were believed to live originally in the storm winds, so they were seen as kind of an air elemental, but it was specific to storming and stormy winds. There were people who actually believed that they were the spirits of the winds themselves, and that a Harpy couldn't show up unless the storm was raging. Like I said, kind of like the sylphs for the air element, but they were only for storms. So that's kind of an interesting side note here. The name Harpy has some interesting meanings, though. And as I was poking around, there were a lot of variations of what it actually meant, but we're going to go over just the basic ones. There is a theory that says that the name Harpy actually means snatcher, which also is believed to be a grave robber. They were known to steal food from their victims before wreaking havoc on the victims. So if you were sitting somewhere and all of a sudden your food disappeared, it was probably a good sign the Harpies were coming. Harpies were known to carry off evildoers, especially ones who harmed their own family, which I thought that was an interesting little tidbit. So if you have done something that hurt your family, your spouse, your children, your family name, good honor, you just invoked the wrath of the Harpies. They did not deal well with that at all. If you committed one of these crimes, whether it was offing somebody, if it was abusing somebody, if it was starving, that was a unfortunately common thing that did happen at times, or if you were stealing from your family, which again, pretty common, the Harpies were on their way. And what was interesting is, as I was digging through this, it wasn't stated anywhere. You could call upon the Harpies, not the wisest decision, but most of the time the Harpies would just know. They were divine to a point. So when you did something wrong, their little radars would ping, and here they came. And tonight's kombucha, we're still sticking with the gratitude one by Synergy. It's their apple, turmeric, carrot, and spices one. This seasonal one is one of my favorites. So once the Harpies had collected their victim, they were taken and handed off either to the Erinyes, which are a group of evil. Basically, they weren't really evil. They were more of the balancers of fate. They were a group of women female deities, I should say, that would torture someone to make them pay for their crimes. Or the Harpies would take them and dump them into the heart of Tartarus itself, which Tartarus, if you have researched into Greek mythology much, you know is the jail for all of the Titans. So this was not something that you would escape from. If the Harpies came for you, you're kind of done. In the branch of the lore with the Titans in specific, they're often seen as evil, the Harpies were, because they were agents of destruction, chaos, and punishment. Well, punishment's not really evil, but back in the day, that's how they viewed it. They were vicious and cruel, and sometimes it would take days for them to reach Tartarus because they were tormenting and torturing their victim before they dropped them off. Because, you know, if you're gonna do something like that, enjoy your job is, I guess, where you would go with that. But also, there were times in different stories that I was reading where someone would be walking along talking to their friend and poof, gone. Le poof. No more. And it was always theorized that the Harpies knew that that person had committed a crime against their family and had snuck this person away to be taken elsewhere. And this happened moderately frequently according to some of the lore, not like everyday occurrences, but enough to make it a reference in historical note. And mysterious disappearances throughout this time period, and we're talking all of Greece and most of Rome, were generally attributed to the Harpies in some form, which, you know, all these modern day stories of alien abductions, were we just talking about Harpies? Maybe? You never know. On that note, sleep well. In all of the Greek myths that I could dig up, the Harpies were seen as the hounds of Zeus. They were always tied to some form of Zeus was their master. Another name for the Harpies were the ministers to the Thunderer. Zeus was seen as the god of lightning and thunder, so we're still working within that boundary. And of course, Zeus would be their masters. Zeus conquered, with help obviously, but he was the main one, conquered the Titans and locked them away in Tartarus. And you'll find out why that's important with the Harpies here in a second. Along with these other awesome names with the Harpies, they were seen as guardians of the underworld, similar to the Gorgons and Cerberus and things like that. But unlike the Gorgons and Cerberus, the Harpies were actually allowed and encouraged to venture out into the daylight, into the living world with a modicum of frequency. They were out actually looking for people who've been doing bad things. But the rest of the guardians of the underworld tended to stay in the dark. They didn't wander out in the light very often, because it kind of hurt when you live in the dark all the time. When not dragging people to Tartarus, the Harpies would actually reside on the islands of Strophades, which is around the Crete area, and there was a specific cave that was known to be the Harpies' homeland. And it might not be in the underworld. Excuse me. But when we're talking about caves and gateways like that, those were generally seen as pathways to the underworld. So even though you may not have been storming the gates of Hades, you were still being seen as a guardian of the underworld, because you would achieve the underworld if you went into caves. So I did kind of dig around looking specifically for Strophades or Strophades. I'm really bad with those names. And I could not find anything that showed the historical significance or any of specific caves attributed that were not 100% tourist trap photos. It seems to be the entire area has turned into kind of a resort. I mean, they are on some really beautiful islands. They're in some amazing ocean or seas there. But could we just have some pictures of the scenery without all the tourists? Like, just a couple? No. Okay. And I'm looking for old world stuff. I really don't care about the tourist traps that have popped up in those places. So I couldn't find anything, and that was unfortunately a last minute thing. So yeah, that's where we're at. So where do the Harpies come from? Thankfully, they were not the children of Echidna and Typhon. They didn't have tentacles, so that's a good sign. They were traditionally seen as the children of Electra and Thaumas, which Electra and Thaumas were children of Titans. Now we're getting somewhere. And I'm going to talk about Electra and Thaumas later, because I was poking around a little bit on a side quest there, and it's like, okay, so we have more people to talk about. This is going to be an ongoing thing, and I don't know if I'm going to get into the Titans with the Greeks, or if I'll maybe hold off on Titans until we look further down the road. All depends on how I feel and what you guys have to say. Anyway, the Harpies were seen as the children of Electra and Thaumas. They were also the sisters of a deity, lower deity, called Iris, and she is going to be another one, because I started digging down that rabbit hole, and I'm not going too much into it, but a little teaser about Iris. She is the goddess of rainbows and messages. I thought that was an interesting little tidbit, so I'll share. Some of the legends have them as siblings of the river gods Arche and Hidespes. I'm terrible with some of these names. I even listened to an Arche and Hidespes. Hidespes is the one I tried to listen to, and I'm probably not saying it right even there. But we have a lot of other deities being introduced with the Harpies. Some of the Harpies came to be known outside of the group Harpies. Not many. I looked around. There's a few more modern ones that you can find, but the traditional ones, which is what we're going with here, were Aello, Asepide, Solano, and where'd the last one go? Podargi. Again, these names. So Aello was seen as, the interpretation of her name is basically the swift storm. She was probably the fastest of the Harpies. She was brought up, I believe, by Homer. No, not Homer. I didn't write down the name. Anyway. And so was Asepide, and that one was named for the swiftest wings. So Aello was seen as the fastest within the storms. Asepide was basically the fastest just in flight in general. Virgil added in his own with Solano, and Solano's name in a lot of the interpretations and a lot of the theories surrounding it are basically she's the dark. So I could only imagine, like, as she descends from the heavens and this dark cloud engulfs you, and then all of a sudden you're whipped off to Tartarus or someplace equally as nightmarish. But Homer did actually add one. I got his name in here, just didn't get the other guy's name. And Homer would add the name Podargi to the clan of Harpy names. And Podargi was actually titled the Fleet-Footed. So the others may have had speed in the air, or at least, influenced the light. Podargi was actually pretty fast on her feet, which, okay, we can go with that. I'm okay with the Harpies being able to run on land as well as air, and just gonna toss in a few more things to muddle up this mess. Homer, of course it was Homer, he claimed that the Harpy Podargi was the mother of the two horses that Achilles used when he stormed Troy. The horses were Balius and Xanthus, and the mother was the Harpy Podargi, and the father was actually a being called the West Wind, which had the name of Zephyrus. There's that. Podargi would also birth, good grief, Philoggius and Harpagos. Yeah. These were the horses that Dioscuri would use to win the funeral games of Pelias. And I'm sorry, but that was just weird because Podargi birthed multiple sets of horses, being a bird deity associated with the sylphs. Okay, but two of her children, or her horse children, would be used to storm Troy and help destroy it. The other two would be used to win a gaming challenge over a funeral. Do better, Harpies. That was not one of your better things. There were two more horses that were born too, and the horse thing has got me confused. I couldn't figure out why bird people were birthing horses, unless it was the speed aspect, I guess. But Aello would birth two horses with her partner, the North Wind, which was Boreas, and these two horses were a gift to King Erechtheus. Not much else was said specifically about that, unless I want to go into a deep dive on Erechtheus, but no. I look at supernatural, and I'm looking at gods and deities. Erechtheus was just a normal Greek king and nothing special. So the lore about the Harpies overall, though, is just, it's all over the place. And it's awesome because when we get to more modern times, the Harpies are still all over the place. They do not hold to one standard. There's a few things that they're pretty stable on, but it's not much. There's one story where Zeus was punishing a man. Of course, Zeus did this a lot, so this isn't that surprising. But the trick with this man was Zeus gifted this man the gift of prophecy so that he could see the future and help the humans that he was around. But little jackwagon got a little too into himself and started casting his prophetic eye to the heavens, and to specifically Mount Olympus, where he discovered some secrets about the gods. The gods didn't want him knowing, and he shared them to the mortal world, kind of like Prometheus in his situation. But Zeus became furious at this man, and we're not talking like a little bit of anger. When Zeus got mad, things went bad. Well, Zeus would blind the man and then stuff him on an island that was full of food. Okay, you're blind, you might fall off a cliff, but there's food around. But there's a problem here. Zeus would stick him on the island with all this food that smelled amazing, and you could eat as much as you want, but he also sicked the Harpies on the island. As I said before, the Harpies have an insatiable appetite, and they would show up and devour all of the food before the man could eat anything. They showed up every morning when the food arrived and devoured every single morsel. It was said, though, if they couldn't eat it all, they would pour a foul substance on all of the leftover food, rendering it inedible. And I have to say this right now, because when I read that, I kind of giggled like a third grader. And then I read it again and continued to giggle, because how much do you want to bet that they would poo on all the food? Like just fly over and drop gigantic chicken droppings all over all the food, making it completely inedible. Yeah, I mean, just a thought. And it made me laugh. So I'm going to share that with you. The Harpies would eventually be driven off from this island by Jason and the Argonauts. For being a bunch of mortals, the Jason crew specifically, supposedly mortals, are going to be an interesting one to go over. That'll probably be a two-parter because there's so much lore surrounding them. Anyway, they would drive off the Harpies. One Harpy, it was said, died during this particular chase. The others were eventually driven to exhaustion, which I could only imagine how far that travel went. And they would agree to stop harassing dude on the island. And it was said once they were basically bested by speed, they returned to their cave on the Isles of Crete to basically, leave this guy alone till his death. But the Harpies would not disappear with Greece. The Romans would collect them and add them to their lore. And then from there, they would continue into the Middle Ages, where we'd get, awesome images like this. Because for being people in the Middle Ages, they had amazing art, but some of their art was like, what were you thinking? Kind of like this. Anyway, they would actually pass into a lot of different literature. Various poets would write about them during this dark period in the world. One in particular would be Dante Alighieri, who would bring them forward in his Inferno section of the Divine Comedy. In the seventh ring of hell, the ring of self-harm, or self-deletion, gotta be careful what you say on the tubes, but the Harpies would actually tend the forest of lost souls. And in the movie and in the video game for Dante's Inferno, which I really wish they would hurry up and make a second, I don't think they're going to, which really annoys me, but in this level of hell, the trees themselves, when someone would the soul would be banished into the seventh hell, and they would be basically planted in pain, where their tree would grow in pain, and it would be a constant wailing through this forest. And I haven't read the Divine Comedy in a while, so it's not as fresh in my mind, but I do know that the trees were pain. The Harpies nested in the tops of the trees, and if a tree was to whatever, the Harpies would attack the tree, and the trees would bleed like mortals. So this was not a happy place to be sent. And when we talk about the Forest of Lost Souls, this was a very, very dark part of hell, getting close to the center of hell because you're in the seventh circle. And this is where the Harpies held domain and held sway. So this is not a place you'd want to go, ever. Because, well, the Harpies were there. But there were other poets that would describe the Harpies as well. And there was a whole bunch of different ones that I poked around in. And I was like, nothing special, nothing caught my attention. You'd read about them, it was general description, so I just kind of ignored it. But I ran across one name that I was like, ooh, have to add him. William Shakespeare liked the Harpies because he added him to a couple of his plays. One was The Tempest, and here we would have a Harpy named Ariel torturing the antagonist of the story, making a similar theme to the older stories about befouled food being struck blind. There was actually a group of men that were struck blind, and Ariel was like picking on them all the whole time. Shakespeare also would make use of the Harpy's nature, not so much the bird itself, but the nature, to describe the heroine in Much Ado About Nothing, calling Beatrice a harpy with a sharp tongue. She may not have had claws like that, but she was definitely a wicked person. And what's funny is that particular insult, this is one of the first times I ran across it when I was looking for, like, where did we get the term harpy for a caustic person, usually female. They all kind of go back to the time period of Shakespeare, but there's also some references, nothing's too specific going back further. But if you haven't watched Much Ado About Nothing, or if you haven't read the book by Shakespeare, I highly recommend it. It is so many of Shakespeare's works are fun. This one, though, is just entertaining all the way around. But also within this time period of the Shakespeare and the poets, we have the heraldry, the royal houses of Europe, adding harpies to their crests of the great houses. Germany used the harpy in a lot. I think there was like 6 different city-states within Germany that used the harpy as part of their crest. So the harpies actually carried forward quite well, unlike some of the other ones that would disappear and pop back up. The harpies' history is pretty continuous from Greece forward, so that says something for their longevity. And what's funny is the harpies weren't banished just to dusty old books and ancient myths. One of the places where I first read about the harpies, we won't talk about how long ago this is, because the book, I own the book, but it's no longer in print. I can't even remember the name of it. I can see the cover in my head. But they talk about harpies as immortals, but they were kind of associated with phoenixes, but not exactly, where they could be killed and they would be reborn because they were immortal. And it was an evil sorcerer was trying to cast a spell on this one harpy, and it was to basically the end of her days. He would be bound to her, and this evil sorcerer it was a romance novel, hated this other immortal, I think it was a god, and so he eventually captures the god and the harpy, but the harpy and the god were, lovers. And so the evil wizard, because he'd bound the harpy to him so she couldn't actually be with the god, he would, to torture the god, do bad things to the harpy. Well, when he ended her life after a certain period of, or many of times, what the god didn't realize, but the harpy did, and she was super excited about this, because after 3 deaths, that she would be able to break all curses, because each time she died, she gained more strength and more powers. Well, by time 3, she'd actually got strong enough to break the spell from the sorcerer, and then the harpy's nature showed up. Judging from what we've talked about, their aggressive tactics, their destructive nature, you can guess what happened next. But that was one of the first introductions to harpies outside of Shakespeare that I'd ever read, and it was entertaining because you don't think about them that way. But for the most part, what I found were harpies were actually kind of immortal, so they don't really have a death time, and that would tie into, especially being grandchildren of the Titans, they've got some powerful blood tied in there. But we also have, and I went on, I'm so sorry for what's about to happen. Well, I am, but I'm not. I went on a side quest when I talk about being banished to ancient, dusty old books and myths, and I ran across these monstrous beasts. Monstrous. They're beautiful birds, don't get me wrong, but they're gigantic. The harpy eagle, which there might be some association here, which is a very large, wicked-looking eagle. And I went on a dive because I'm like, ooh, harpy eagle, what else do I learn here? They have the largest talons of any of the eagles. They are said to be the world's largest eagle. And I was doing some looking around, and most references to them in texts and such reference them as the world's largest eagle breed. So they're not small birds, they're gigantic. When they're standing on the ground or standing on something, from the bottom of their feet to the top of their little fuzzy heads, they are between 3 and 4 feet tall. Now, that doesn't sound like much. Stand up and get a ruler and see how tall of an eagle we're talking about. That's not a small bird. That's huge. They have a wingspan between 5 and 8 feet, depending on a lot of different things. The smaller sizes tend to be the male sizes, whereas the larger ones tend to be the female sizes. The females can actually carry their own body weight or just over their body weight for excessively long periods of time. One of the largest weights that they have caught these eagles carrying, especially the females, were carcasses of 20 pounds, give or take a pound or two. That is gigantic when you really put that into perspective. 20 pounds being carried by something like this, that's impressive. And when you think about it, a 5 to 8 foot wingspan. Now, I've had great horned owls. When I've been going home from work, one of my jobs, I lived out 9 miles out of town, and I'd be coming home late at night, and you just have this entire beast cover the front hood of your vehicle, and you'd see these 2 horns sticking up. Great horned owls are amazingly beautiful animals. But not at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're driving home from work, because when they do that, their wingspan is broader than your car, and you have this head looking in the windows at you, their giant eyes. It's terrifying. But their wingspans are around 6 feet, so pop that out to 8 feet, and tell me if that demon falling from the sky wouldn't scare you to death. Which is where the one Harpy, what was her name? Kalanio. Like, she was called the Dark for a reason. Like, having that descend, you could see that being something that would scare you. The beaks on these beasts can be up to 3 inches in length. Get a ruler, see how big that is. That is a good-sized beak. You do not want that biting you. The talons were between 3.5 to 5 inches, and for perspective size, a grizzly bear's claw is 4 inches long. These birds can have talons that are bigger than a grizzly's. Yeah, have fun with that. And this is an actual bird. This thing exists. They have earned the title of Harpy within their eagle name because of their fierce nature and their size. They are just amazingly huge birds. In some of the cultures, as I was going through this dive into these birds, they were seen as messengers of the divine. Actually, it was good luck to see them. In most cases, there was a couple of tribes that were like, these show up, bad things happen. But they are also, and I thought this was actually really cool, they are monogamous. They mate for life. They're once bonded, they can actually be bonded to each other for between 25 and 30 years. Yeah, and they're also a bird that can live up to 45 years old. Like, they are an ancient bird when you really think about it. And the baby, I found this picture. I thought it was funny because he looks so angry in this picture. Oh yeah, they've got to eat, and they eat almost 2 pounds of usually meat a day. And as I was rooting through all of this, I was kind of impressed with the relationship part, first of all, because that was cool, having a 30-plus year relationship. Lucky birds. But they only laid eggs every 2 to 3 years. They're not prolific breeders. And they only have 1 to 2 chicks at a time. Even if they lay more eggs, they only usually have a hatching of 1 or 2, which, considering their size, is probably not a bad thing. But they are known in a lot of bird communities to be the marker birds, where their health, their growth, their bonded mate pairs actually can indicate how healthy the overall what am I want to say? I just lost the word. The health of the environment and the ecosystem that they're in. They are kind of the guard birds. So as long as they have a healthy hatching every 2 years or so, they're having 2 babies at a time, and you have several breeding pairs within a few mile area, that's actually a really good sign, because when they start to suffer, it's generally the first sign that there is a downward trend in something bad in the environment there, whether it is pollution, whether it is overhunting, whatever. They actually have some really good indicators, kind of like frogs for swamps. They're that for skybirds, basically. Yeah, they eat a ton. They do have and my views on everything is everything needs to find a balance. These birds are the balance indicator for a lot of their environments. They tend to live in places between 600 and 2,000 feet. Not too often do they go above that. You will find them higher than that, but it's not too typical, not too common. Yeah, geese are challenging. Apparently these guys can be friended, and there was pictures I found online, but they were all Nat Geo stuff, so I'm not touching that. Nat Geo tends to strike channels. And but they have some of their people sitting next to these birds. These things are gigantic, but they're surprisingly gentle with humans. Like, they're not super aggressive, but they are ruthless hunters. And like I said, that was just one of those things when I ran across the name, I'm like, oh, that sounds like cool. And then I started digging into it, and I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Yeah, they managed all that and don't learn how to cook. But they're fascinating birds. They're just gigantic. I would like to see one in person, but I'm also a little bit intimidated because something that size. Oh, the other fun part with these guys, when they mate for life, they only have one primary nest. The nests can be as large as queen-size mattresses over a 15 to 20 year period. They just keep adding to the same one, building it up, spreading it out. So it's like a playground for their hatchlings. And I couldn't find good pictures, again, outside of Nat Geo, and I'm not touching their stuff. It was an impressive list of birds, that's for sure. But back to our Greek myth. The Harpies exist today in their myth and lore, and they are tied into various card games, primarily the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. I just kind of Googled to see where else they showed up. It's pretty much Yu-Gi-Oh! And there are, thanks to all the updates and advances and expansions and whatever, there's like 50 different cards attributed to the Harpies at this point, which was amazingly powerful as far as the spread. They show up a little bit in Magic the Gathering cards, but Yu-Gi-Oh tends to carry the bulk of the Harpies. They show up in various video games, as I've talked about before with the Dante's Inferno one. They showed up in some very old computer games, Heroes of Might and Magic, or Myth and Magic, one of those two, back in the day, where you only could use like 3 keys on your keyboard and your mouse. Stuff like that. There were some older games with Harpies in it, and Funko Pop had to get involved, so I found some of those. I'm just not into that type of stuff with the Funko Pops. They're very weird. An Arabic playing card, I would have to look into that. That sounds cool. And then the other one that popped up a lot with Harpies, and I was kind of confused by this, except for the aggressive nature of Harpies, the metal bands. They were everywhere. If it's not symbols on their front covers, it's part of their names. They have songs named after Harpies. Like, the Harpies never really went away. They just adapted to our time, basically. There's several books and movies. Like I said, one of my first influences was a trashy romance novel, but they show up in other books as well. I've read multiple books since then. Most of them are pretty horrific, just because that's the type of stuff I like to read. But but that was one of the things that the harpies tend to show up a lot in those darker spots, and anything that I have found, honestly, that has ties to Greek lore is probably going to have a harpy tied somewhere into it, because they were pretty common in the ancient stories. Yeah, they were in Clash of the Titans as well. Grecians. Yeah, the old 8-bit games and 16-bit games, there's just nothing quite like that. Nostalgia is my I do enjoy the old stuff. I ran across a couple of movies that talk about harpies, but they are, and don't get me wrong, I love B horror films. They're some of my favorite things. These ones look like they were down the road from B by a minute or 30. And I mean, you can check them out if you wanted to go digging for them. I personally was looking through them, looking at reviews, trying to find some titles that sounded fun. Most of them actually were titled Harpies. Oh, and the other fun one, I'm shuffling my cards for our tarot reading for the Harpies here. The other fun one I ran across is Stan Lee actually did some work on Harpies in his day. One of the probably greatest comic book artists in history. Harryhausen special. Yeah, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that went on with the Harpies. They're kind of fascinating. They're kind of horrifying, but that's their beauty and their myths. And the Greeks knew how to do both. It was amazing how they started stuff. The Romans basically stole the Harpies, is all I have to say on that one. But since our show tonight is called, if I hit the right button, Myth and Tarot, we're going to hop over to do the tarot part of this, where I basically read as if the Harpies, or whatever creature or deity I am talking to, is sitting across from me. So, and of course my computer's being special right now, so yeah, and I didn't realize that Stan Lee had actually ventured into that, because I read pretty much one style, and as I was looking up Harpies in modern day stories, he actually did some, it wasn't like a big thing, it wasn't super popular, but he did have some attachment to some of the Harpies, and he added them to, it didn't look like it was a super popular comic back in the day, so, but yeah, there was something tied to him with that. I was like, that's pretty cool, because Stan Lee was, like I said, one of the best comic book artists ever. Yeah, exactly. In the traditional tarot, yeah, I think it is in that one. Now that you say that, let me see if I got my. I use a specific deck for this stream, and that is the Tarot Art Nouveau, the one I linked in the description. But now I'm curious about, what was this? Wheel of Fortune. I haven't studied this deck as much as I would like to. I'm going through it right now with some friends of mine. We're trying to deepen our knowledge of the tarot by starting off with the primary Smith Waite deck, and I will continue to call it that until the end of my days. I did a fairly long video on Pamela Pixie Smith, and that's the one that I stick with. I don't want to call it Rider Waite, because that takes away her contribution to it. Oh, she does too. That's pretty cool. Wheel of Fortune. But yeah, there was some interesting. There's like where is that one? There's a Sphinx sitting there, and then it looks like there's an angel, and either a phoenix, possibly a harpy, because the descriptions are similar in a lot of the old texts. And then we've got the other beasts below it. And the phoenix is another one that I will probably go over, and when I do that, it'll the parallels are going to be a little surprising, especially when you're talking about human phoenix versus the bird exclusive one. But yeah, the blue creature sitting on top is actually a sphinx, but there's a bird off to the side that's reading, which could indicate a harpy, but it could also be a phoenix. So Anyway, we'll hop over to our tarot reading for the Harpies, because we're not on Phoenix, Harpies. And so the way I do these is, like I said, it's as if the Harpy is sitting directly in front of me and I'm reading this for them. So this card is their card. This is who they are in this moment, the significator, if you will. We have the Knave of Chalices. And I read intuitively, so the meanings that come through may not be the same on the cards. The Knave of Chalices is saying that they're kind of in an emotional state. They've gained control over their emotions, so they may not be as wild and aggressive as they used to be. But what it's saying, what I'm hearing from this is where they're at now is they've gained more control over themselves. They are able to actually function in society. Their insatiable craving for flesh and etc. have been kind of tamed down a little bit. They're not as aggressive as they were. There's still a lot they have to learn, but they've achieved a lot in their existence so far. So the thing that's crossing them, which is kind of their main obstacle or challenge, is I have to edit this card, the stars. And the stars are saying that they have so many things available to them, and they have a partnership. Obviously, the star card has 2 women on it, so they rely on each other, but that's also something that gets in their way because they don't trust outside people. The Harpies, from what I'm seeing right here, they've gained a lot of knowledge. They're emotionally more stable than they used to be, but their reliance and their almost codependency is something that works against them. And then we're working into this concept of the stars are saying you've got a lot of potential, but you're not using it because of this codependency. It's like holding you back. So they have that. That's the kind of the energy that's crossing them. And then we have the higher self, their higher influences. It's the Knight of Chalices. So it's actually their emotions are something that can be used as a tool to benefit them. And the Knight of Chalices is not it's an active movement one. It's not like Earth with no movement, but it's not as fast as air or air. Swords or wands. So this knight is actually moving forward, and it's saying that their emotions are actually advancing and they are becoming more aware and more capable of deepening their abilities. It's also saying that they've gained enough knowledge of, I'm hearing warfare, that's an interesting one, that they know when's the appropriate time to step into a fight and when's the time to step back and be like, you know what, you got this, I am not getting involved. And that's that emotional control that they've gained. So water is actually playing kind of a heavy role for these gals so far. Their subconscious or shadow self is the 2 of Wands. There's still this innocence when you talk with Wands. This is kind of fiery energy, this innocent coyness of, I could get in that fight, maybe I will. You know, you've got the devils on your shoulders, devil on one side, the angel on the other. The devil's saying, come on now, let's go toss in with this fight, let's do this. Not the healthiest part of a relationship, but we also have that innocent aspect of, you could, but you don't need to, but you could. And so there's a little bit of back and forth. You've got that knight, the more regal energy, saying, you know what, pick your battles. Not everything needs to be fighted. Not everything needs to be fought. And the 2 of Wands is like, yeah, but you could. So that's their war between their higher self and their lower self. Their immediate past, we're talking about beings that are virtually immortal, so we'll go about 200 years back, is the 3 of Pentacles. The last couple hundred years for the Harpies has actually been kind of quiet. They've almost become sedentary in a lot of their ways. There's been some prosperity. They've had some, flare-ups of popularity, but it's not been as strong as it could have been. And what I'm hearing is that's actually helped them grow as a group, as a set of entities, is to become something better. So what we have here with the 3 of Pentacles is you've got the woman. So the human aspect of the Harpy is actually taking dominion because the falcon or the bird aspect, the more animalistic part of the Harpy, is being brought to task. Like, it's not in control anymore. So their past is where they learned the restraint and learned that ability to hold themselves together and be able to step into this new light. So their immediate future, the next 200 years or so, is the Knave of Pentacles. And with that, what I'm hearing is their future almost has them being a little bit arrogant. You can see the eagles up here as well. Their future has them being a little bit arrogant. With Pentacles, though, it's a grounded arrogance. It's not going to be like, I'm so much better. It's, I have grown beyond what I was. And so you've got this energy from in their future that they're actually going to be working to better themselves, not just on a emotional state, but in a physical state as well. And so you've got a little bit of growth potential there. There's also a opportunity if they so choose. Harpies are not known to be, romantically interested in people, but there is a chance of that when you work with earth energy. It tends to work into the home, but you also have a financial aspect. So their future is actually monetizing off of their past challenges. Their current attitude, like this is where they are at in their minds. This is more of their yes, I forgot about that aspect too. But the two crows, it could also be two crows, which is the semblance to Odin with his the two that watch the Hugane and Mugane. I'm horrible with these names. But where they're at right now, kind of their emotional state, their attitude about life, which if you look at the Harpies' history, they are sassy. And in their current one, though, they're tied into the moon, which is number 18. With the moon energy, it tends to be a bit more toned down with their sass. They still are very intuitive. They're very intelligent beings, but they don't have this drive to push forward. They don't have this drive to be the meanest MFer in the room. They now know more about when to get into the fray and when not. And when we talk about the moon ties into this water energy that's really prevalent right now. And it's also reminding them that that's, go with the flow. There's no need for that. Listen to your intuition. When the moon shows up, you have divine goddess energy. You also have divine intuition stepping forward. And the Harpies are all female, so you've got that feminine aspect of it. But their attitude is really starting to mellow down a little bit. And they're starting to tap into that more intuitive aspect. Not the animal instinct part, but the more intuitive, rational part. And then we're moving into, where are we at? Their current environment, I love this, is the Hanged Man. The Hanged Man is the challenge to look at things from a different perspective. The Harpies' environment overall is pushing them to not look at things the way they used to. It's saying it is time for changes. It is time to reevaluate everything that you have done before. And when we have the Hanged Man show up, especially with the environment, it is demanding at this point. You don't have the option. You have to change. You have to adapt. This is not being set up for minor things. It's really being aggressive, and that's what I'm hearing with this is, yes, your attitude's getting better, but you're not looking at the broader picture. And now it's time, because the picture is being kind of forced on them, they have to adapt to be able to, keep interacting in this world. Their hopes and fears, which is the Nine of Wands. Oh, I gotta edit this one. I love this deck, but it is done in the style of a little racy at times. Again, we're on the internet, so we have to be careful what I show. But the Nine of Wands, what I'm hearing with this one for their hopes and fears, they have the hope and the joy of, we haven't been forgotten. Other of the creatures and beings from ancient Greek and the ancient world have been forgotten. But they know, because their hope and their joy in that is, we haven't been. But they are afraid that in this new world, this modern chaos that we all live in, that they're going to be separated from their family, which is the other Harpies. Their fear is kind of unfounded because the Harpies as a whole stick together. And so you've got this little bit of back and forth. Their joy is like, we haven't been forgotten, we're still popular, we're still growing, look at all the places where we're at, literally everything. But there's that fear of what happens if. And I mean, we all have that fear. But with them in particular, they don't want to break up the family. They like being the group that they are. And their fear is kind of unfounded in that aspect, because even if they started to, find partners and grow in that aspect, it's not going to actually pull them apart. It's actually going to bind them stronger in that sense of things. So their overall outcome is the Two of Swords. It's their minds, their intellect that's going to do it. Their, as I said earlier, their sassy, fiery personality is going to be the thing that keeps them going. They're going to stay bonded with each other. It's interesting how many paired up females are in this reading. So they're not going to be separated, is what I'm seeing. The Two of Swords also is talking about there's new thoughts, new concepts, new ideas that are coming forward for the Harpies. So overall, they have a good future as long as they don't let their egos get in the way. And they've learned a lot from their history. Overall, we've got, starting off with the Knave of Chalices, where they have become more emotionally mature. Their higher self is actually really mature, showing them the times to act when not to act. They still have this little shadow imp down here that wants to get into fights, but it's not as dominant as it used to be. Their history was getting the human side of the Harpy becoming more the dominant aspect versus having the animalistic, instinctive part that I'm hungry, therefore I must eat, and whatever's in front of me I'm going to tear apart. And it's moved into that future energy for the Harpies, where they have gained the knowledge, and that's setting them up for success overall down the road. And their attitude is actually really good. It's become more calm and more quiet, more go with the flow, as long as they can actually start looking at things from a different perspective versus that locked in, this is how the world is, because the world's changed a lot just in the last 50 years, let alone in the last 200 years. And then their fears. They just need to understand, just because things are growing and changing and, adapting, it doesn't mean that you're going to separate from the group, the family that you have built. The Harpies family is thousands of years old now. I don't see that just breaking up just because. And then you have the Two of Swords. They are happy where they're at. The overall outcome is there's not going to be a huge divide. There might be some shakeup going on there, but we're talking about air energy, which is what's associated with the Harpies overall as well. And that's allowing them to step into this world because they're not going to be alone. They have their family, and it's this opportunity to learn and grow and expand with the stuff that they've already gained through their history, through all the warfare that they've done over the years, through having to deal with Zeus and all his chaos. And they didn't have to live in Tartarus. They could visit. They'd go in, come out. They were able to live in their own world. And that all played into their fact that they have had a massive amount of emotional, physical, and spiritual growth for them. So as we move forward with the Harpies, they've not been forgotten, thankfully. They're still roaming around out there. They're still being used as insults, which is funny in a sense, but it's not because of derogatory. Their insult was because they were powerful and spoke their mind. That was what was the insult, which is not really an insult. So when we move forward from the Harpies, when we look at their interesting history, their parentage, which was from Titans, we're dealing with very powerful, strong entities. If there's still a Harpy roaming around out there, and you see a bird flying above you, bird casts a shadow, just kind of smile and be like, well, you didn't take me to Tartarus, so we're good today. But overall, it looks like the Harpies are going to have a successful future, and I'm getting the impression from that reading that they're actually going to be able to step back into our more modern conscious awareness and not just be relegated to, the random romance novel or horror novel. So who knows? We might see a resurgence of Harpies in the future, which I think would be kind of fun. But with that, thank you all for showing up for the chat. I've been trying to keep up with what you've what's been posted, and showing up and visiting. Like I said, you guys are the reason the channel is growing, and I really do appreciate that. So we'll wrap this up here real quick. Thank you everyone for showing up, and I will see you guys in the next episode of Myth and Tarot, which will be in about 2 weeks. Next week will be the occult and crochet one, where we talk about a spiritual person, actual physical person from history. We've been going through the witch hunters, so that's been fun. And then there'll be some random videos being dropped throughout the week. So I will see you guys later. Have a great rest of your week, and thank you once again.